everyone. It's 8 o'clock. My name is Erwin Maas. I'm an event curator at Studium Generale, Utrecht University's public platform for knowledge and reflection. Tonight is the second installment in our event series called Beyond Capitalism, that we organized together with the Visions for the Future research project, which is conducting an ethical analysis of socio-economic systems that have been proposed as alternatives to contemporary capitalism. And in this series, we invite prominent thinkers to give their vision for a better economic future beyond neoliberal capitalism as we now know it. In September, Tim Jackson was here talking about degrowth, and tonight we'll be talking about workplace democracy or economic democracy. So in 1970, Milton Friedman wrote in his famous New York Times essay that the only social responsibility of business is to increase its profit. This essential neoliberal idea is what our economy in many ways still lives by. Firms and politics are strictly separated, and making profit is more important than the interests of the employees, the workers, and the world they live in. Why is it time to democratize work? What is our way out, and what does real economic democracy look like? That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Before I'll introduce our keynote speaker, let me give you an idea of this evening. So first we have the keynote lecture, then a short response by Caleb Althorpe, whom I'll introduce to you later, and then it's time for your questions. Let me introduce our keynote speaker. She is a sociologist and professor at the University of Louvain, a senior research associate at Harvard University and distinguished research fellow at Oxford University. She is the author of many books, including Firms as Political Entities, and since the beginning of this year, she's the chair of the International Committee of High-Level Experts on Workplace Democracy by the Spanish government. I'm very honored that she's here. Please give her a warm round of applause. Isabelle Ferreras.
Dank u, Erwin. Het is een enorme plezier met jullie te zijn. Well, this is a very intense topic, right? From shareholder capitalism to economic democracy. So this is a topic that mobilizes emotions generally. And so I invite you to breathe and really enjoy the opportunity that we have in a free society still to think about these critical issues, critical for our future, critical for humanity, for the planet, and for democracy indeed. So my talk is going to be divided in 4 parts. I'm going to share a few key notions because I believe that this topic being so difficult, controversial, it's important that we try to understand each other. Then I will move at the question of why caring for this issue. Why should we care? And when that is settled, we will move into the question of, is there a way out? What is the way out? Then I will suggest a way forward. So this is a very hopeful presentation. I hope it will not crush you. I hope it will energize you. And I really hope that this will motivate all the energetic and utopian energies that you have within yourself, because I'm sure that if you are here tonight, it's certainly because you are also hopeful. So let's go at these key notions. So first, we need to talk a bit of the same language to make sure that right away we can together see two sets of facts that I wish we can see the same way. This is a very ugly picture, this diagram I'm showing you, but I can't find a more beautiful way to present things. What is this? It's the structure of the corporation. The structure of the corporation, as you see in the upper General Assembly of Shareholders, that's the demos that govern the corporation, that oversee the strategy of the firm, that empower a board, which entrusts a CEO then to conduct the business of the firm and the many projects that the firm is developing. So far, and it's entirely normal, I have not been talking about those who work in this context, those who deploy these projects, because this is not meant to address the situation of those who work. Is it normal? Absolutely, it's normal. It is the way it's been designed. The structure of the corporation is about structuring the relationships of those who bring in capital among themselves. And this is not a sociologist who's going to say this, it's corporate legal scholars who view the corporation as such. And they enjoy the right to decide over the rules of the joint endeavor. And here what's really key, the principle that's key in this arrangement is that the political right to govern is really derived, is attached to the ownership. It's because you have a share in the corporation that you are enjoying a political right to co-govern the corporation. You might think this description is a bit backward, and that's true. I am actually tonight in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, as probably many of you know, we have known better, a bit better. So let me show you, this is Germany. In Germany, corporations are supervised when they employ more than 2,000 employees by a board within which half the members are representative of the workers. And in the Netherlands, actually, it's a third. So this is the principle of co-determination, as we call it. And in fact, in Europe, among EU countries, 2/3 of EU countries know some form of co-determination. That is, that employees have the right to appoint board members. It might be one, it might be two, it might be a third, it might be a half, like in the largest German companies. Still, all these arrangements ensure, in some ways, that those who work remain the junior partner of capital. That means workers are never in a position to develop their views about what should be the strategy of the firm, what should be the product or the service that we are developing. They are always in a minority position. Yet, this, I believe, is a major step. The fact that in our history this has existed and it exists today is a major step because it speaks for this fundamental quest, which is to detach the political rights from ownership. When you make that, actually, you are in a democratic quest. Because what is democracy if not the detachment of equal rights, political rights, from ownership. And we've known in the 19th century, we have known census, plural voting, right? So voting, political rights were attached to ownership. This principle, we fought it in the political arena, but it's still very much alive in the economic arena and certainly in the corporation. Breaking this link is really about the project of economic democracy. So that was the first common ground that needed to be put in place. The second one is the question about, and I have this beautiful slide to show you, but that just highlights what I say. So the second question is the second point, who are taking risks? I would like to ask you for a minute to think about the endeavor of any business that you can have in mind, and let's ask ourselves, who are taking risks? Who are the risk takers? The usual answer, and if you open a newspaper, the mainstream answer will be, well, the investors. And who are the investors? The investors generally are the Elon Musks of this world. And well, yes, they're taking some risks, but really, are they really taking real risks? Well, what they are taking as a risk is the risk of losing the net value of their shares. And obviously, that's very annoying, that's frustrating if you are losing, if the value of your share goes to zero, it's certainly something that you don't really enjoy. But is it really a risk of the same nature as what these people are going through? How about these people? How about the risks that they are taking? The risks that they are taking is enormous. It's not that the value of the share goes to zero, it's a risk on their health, mental or physical. It's a risk for their set of skills that can get totally out of date if the company gets rid of them. It's the risk of losing their social identity or their social network, the risk of losing their sense of purpose as a person who's embedded into a social network and contributing to society. And basically it can be the risk of just losing the head above, the roof above their head. So that's an entirely other level of magnitude of risks at the level of the individual life. So why should we care? In 2000, during the first COVID lockdown, we were more than 6,000 scholars from around the globe to call for attention to this reality. Those workers, and the essential workers in particular, are taking the maximum risks. And we wanted to question this reality, to really question society in its sudden feeling that we should recognize those workers, we should do something, and we were all outside clapping, at the window to recognize their sacrifice, but isn't there more to do than just clapping in our hands? Indeed, the investment that these workers are making is massive, is maximal, and what we said in that op-ed, and we researched this topic. We published a lot of books ever since, including the one in Dutch, democratischer, ons werk. We basically said that if we wanted to express our gratitude, recognize that risks and that investment, we should democratize firms, we should decommodify labor, and we should decarbonize the planet. Now, you might think, but why should we care after all? And it's a bit probably what society in general has been thinking. Well, we had those nice feelings at that moment. We were like very moved, but after all, isn't the economic system, hasn't the economic system not crushed many lives over time? Isn't eventually how things are going, sadly? Well, besides this recognition at the individual level, that is an imperative, a moral imperative, we might call it, in the name of the dignity of workers, maybe other type of concerns might actually touch you, like the urgent reason to care for the planet and to fit our economy within the 9 planetary boundaries. Tim Jackson told you about that. Or maybe you might actually care for your own freedom and the future of democracy. All these reasons are deeply, intimately connected to our topic tonight. The structure of the firm, indeed, and the way the firm is organized and its political structure in terms of decision-making is actually deeply connected to these 2 main topics. Let me just touch on each of those 2 pressing consequences, because we could do a full evening on just each of them. The planet, well, for the planet, it's quite simple. A regime of government of the firm that put capital in the driver's seat and that put in a financialized world, as we know it, capital in a position to exert power so that it gets higher and higher returns, that is simply an extractive regime that is treating and will continue to treat workers as simple resources that are disposable, and the planet. But our problem is that the planet is not a renewable resource. We only have one. So, with that type of regime of government of the firm, it's impossible to think that it's going to produce another type of world, another type of economy, and we are doomed to extinction. On the political democracy, you probably remember Karl Marx, not Karl Marx, Karl Polanyi, who is less known, but certainly many of you know about Polanyi, who's an Austrian historian who studied the fall of Germany into fascism. And Polanyi spoke about the violence of the market as the reason why people turn to authoritarian regime. And what he calls the fascist solution that eventually Germany found in the 1930s to face the crushing conditions that the society was facing. It is out of despair that people will fall for the fascist solution, as Polanyi puts it. And this is exactly what we are currently witnessing in the US, the end of political democracy. When corporations generate through this regime of government, internal regime of government, where capital is in the driver's seat, when corporations can generate a month of wealth that can truly distort, then capture the political regime, then, as a result, this is what we are seeing. The rules of the capitalist corporation gets extended into the police. This is capitalist despotism, as we could call it. So that's very frightening. And the question is there a way out? Is there a way out? Absolutely, there is a way out. And we have never, I believe, never find ourselves in a much better position to see this way out than today, as we are seeing this world around us in such a state of despair. We need to get clear on one more notion, which is to understand the very nature of what firms are. These corporations, which is the legal vehicle of firms, are actually much better understood as political entities. Yes, they are political entities in the sense that they literally govern the life of their workers, the life of those who invest through their labor into the firm, are on an everyday basis governed by them. Workers are governed in the way that some, and many actually today, still cannot choose whenever they need to go to take a break to go to the bathroom. They're monitored, they're controlled. But also, firms are governing the time that we can spend with our children or don't have to spend with our children. As obviously, they decide on the type of products, the type of service that we are going to devote ourselves to produce. So those who labor invest in the firm are truly governed by the rules of the firm. But also, let's think about the extended citizens in an age of social media companies, for instance. We are also literally governed by these transnational corporations. We choose who we see in our social network, whom we are becoming friends with, or whom we can like or not like. So our social network is more and more governed, decided over by these companies. And you know what? They know about that. And actually they recognize that. And I want to give you this example because I think it's a very striking example that this is not only some sociological understanding, but look at what the company Meta has put into place in the last few years. In recent years, basically, they've taken steps that de facto recognizes that they are political entities. Look at this. In 2018, you might remember that, it was very strange to realize that Nick Clegg, the man you see on the right, next to the Prime Minister of the UK at the time, went from being the Vice Prime Minister of the UK to become the Vice President of Meta. He became, Nick Clegg, the VP for Public Affairs of Meta, in charge of a real network of ambassadors of Meta to the various relevant nations that Meta has in its strategy. That's 2018. Then in 2020, Meta appointed a so-called oversight board. You might have heard of this board, because this board has been entrusted to decide in matters of moderation problems. So whenever users are not happy with the decisions that Meta take, you can file a complaint, And actually, Zuckerberg decided that it was probably too much power for him to take all those decisions. So he looked at the Supreme Court of the United States and he thought, oh, we might need some Supreme Court for Meta. And what Meta put in place and has in place, working very efficiently since 2020, is this oversight board, which has a body of judges appointed to rule on cases of moderation and independently of Meta, and Meta has committed to enact on those decisions. So very much looking like the US Supreme Court. And then in 2022, Meta deployed deliberative bodies with users. This is called deliberative polls. And it's one of the most innovative techniques that has emerged in the field of deliberative democracy. Meta actually hired a lab from Stanford, directed by Jim Fishkin at Stanford, who is one of the leaders in this development. And what's the point? The point is to get the input from the users about the moderation decisions of Meta. And what we truly see here is an attempt to mobilize, recognize the users as having some standing into the governance of Meta. What has not changed so far is the capitalist despot. The capitalist despot remains as powerful as ever. And the people it governs, first and foremost its employees, have no standing whatsoever. And so far, there are no innovation that has been announced on that front. So, what's the way forward? The way forward is truly to recognize that these political entities that are firms should be democratized instead of being allowed to be despotic, so that we can make them compatible with our expectations as citizens, so at an individual level, so that the rules that govern us as workers, as labor investors, we consent to them, but also so that at the structural level, firms are embedded into the democratic architecture. So to do that, I told you it's a hopeful perspective. To do that, actually, we need to learn from history and extend what we have learned from history into the economy. And what in particular we should look at is at democratic revolutions. The project of extending equality, this disconnection between political rights and ownership, that ideal, the ideal of equality, is indeed the project of economic democracy, making democracy as an ideal relevant for the economic sphere. And it has two sides, a voice side and an ownership side. I would say it's like the two sides of the coin. You need the two sides, and I will explain you why. But on the voice side, so that's the formidable intuition, the disconnection between political rights and ownership. The disconnect is what we should strive for. And when you look at history, what you learn is that political democratic revolutions have actually hit that wall many, many times. The first time in history is the 5th century before Christ in ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, only the patricians were ruling Rome. Who are the patricians? The ones who own the properties in Rome. Well, after what we can call some general strike, the plebs gained the right to validate and veto the decisions of the patricians, the decisions that the patricians used to take just on themselves. And who were the plebs? They were the merchants, all the essential workers, basically, the army, all the labor investors without whom there was no functioning Rome. The modern example that we can really convene here is the case of Britain. In Britain, you have literally a House of Lords, where the House of Lords was the representation of those who owned the land of Britain. And what is a board of a corporation if not the representation of those who own the shares? So the intuition keeps coming back. It is the idea that to exit the despotism of those who own, today it's the capitalists, yesterday it was the lords, the patricians, those who own are actually put in check by the recognition of the collective rights of all those who don't own to validate or veto the decisions. It's a collective right. It's through an assembly in general. This is why this is actually technically the history of bicameralism. And this is why I'm speaking about economic bicameralism, to think about a perspective of extending this principle of democratic revolution into the corporate field. And I told you, when you look at Germany, you see the intuition of the disconnection, right? But here is another graph that I wanted you to look at, because these are actually European Works Councils. You might have heard of them, because actually today, the largest corporations present in Europe, there are more than 1,000 of them, which have a European Works Council. And this is from a directive dating back to 1984. So in those corporations, there is at the EU level a representation of the workers. So workers elect in their country on unions list representatives that get sent to this European Works Council. What do? They meet with the management, the top management at the EU level. This, in my understanding, speaks to this intuition, the intuition that there should be a channel for representation, almost like a chamber, a second chamber, to represent the interests of those who work. What is this chamber currently doing? What is called information and consultation. The threshold that we should pass is to really empower that second chamber and to recognize that second chamber decision rights. All the decisions that are taken by the board should be validated by the representatives of the workers. So the right to validate or veto, that level of rights is what we should talk about. And this would make then the firm a dual majority firm that then would become probably unrecognizable. Because we know from all the research that has been done on the social and cooperative economy that when you empower workers, they are taking very different kind of decisions. They are valuing, for instance, the impacts on the environment because this is where they work and they can see the problems and their consequences even on their own health or the health of their children. We can see that the vast inequality between the remuneration of CEOs and the remuneration of workers is totally shrink. In the context of those firms, the tension is from 1 to 5 or 1 to 3 even. So the practice of the social and cooperative economy really shows us that when you entrust workers to position themselves at the level of the strategic decisions of the firm, each is generating very different kind of decisions. And this is precisely what we are after. We would like to see firms change the type of rationality that they value to move from this extractive rationality that seeks this constant return and higher return on capital investment to a much broader set of objectives that will include the quality of the environment, the quality of the social relations, the community, the impacts on the communities, and the quality of the product and the service itself. I told you there are two sides to the same coin, the coin of economic democracy. The other side is ownership. Why this return to ownership? We should return to ownership because we live in a capitalist society. Even as we might imagine that individually every firm would make this transition to a dual majority type of decision-making system internally, what shall we do with ownership, with the problem of ownership? And here, I guess it's critical to realize that currently the wealth gets accumulated through the corporation. So those shares, the shares into the corporation, which basically capture the value of the corporation, they also should be conceived as something that should become transferable to those who are actually taking those risks and producing the wealth, who are the labor investors, the workers of the firm. And so here, you can project the vision of using legal vehicles like the ESOP plans you might know of. This is a project that has been in place in the United States since 1970, employee stock ownership plans. The idea is that gradually, slowly or very quickly, workers could actually buy back all the shares to those who own them and buy them back collectively to become truly a worker cooperative who is labor-owned and labor-governed. So these tools are not necessarily existing in every society, and we should work to develop them. Slovenia actually last week just passed a legislation enabling these ESOP plans. So this is currently in the making. But so there are all the reasons to think that we can do it. We can certainly practice these principles because they are already practiced in the social and cooperative economy. But we can enable every firm to take this path. And obviously, that remains the big question: how structurally, how at the societal level, can we nurture a societal conversation that will see the point of making this transition to economic democracy? Because it seems that this idea of extending equality to the economic sphere, from the polis to the oikos, and back to the polis, is probably the only reasonable path forward if we indeed want to nurture a future that is democratic, that is sustainable. That is the path forward. So I hope I have given you enough tools so that you can really trust your intuitions. This is not some utopian project. Attending a conference in 2025 on the topic from shareholder capitalism to economic democracy is truly something extremely reasonable to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabelle, for your hopeful talk. There's plenty of room for questions, but first we go to our next speaker. It's time for a response by our next speaker. He's a research fellow at the Ethics Institute at Utrecht University, and he's part of the Visions for the Future project, where he focuses on economic democracy. Please give a warm round of applause for Caleb Althorpe.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. It's great to see so much interest and curiosity in tonight's topic. And I'd also like to extend a big thanks to Isabelle for coming and giving what I'm sure we'll all agree is such an inspiring and fascinating talk. So I first came across Isabelle's work, I think, about 7 years ago when I was starting my PhD. And I can still remember how impressed I was at the time with sort of the clarity of her vision, the confidence with which she advanced her proposal for workplace and economic democracy, and just the deep commitment that kind of came through the pages to the values of democracy and improving workers' lives. And I think all those traits were also on full display tonight. So maybe, well, what I think is one of the most important insights of Isabelle's work, and it came up a lot in tonight's talk as well, is that we shouldn't see the organisation of modern work as a kind of natural fact or something that just happened to evolve this way, but it resulted from specific historic and legal events. And as such, it's inherited all the power relations that has come with those events. And this is why Isabelle was so insistent we have to see modern workplaces as political organisations and not just economic organisations. Under the sort of modern capitalist economies, workplaces are often places where one group of people, so the workers, sort of have to do what's to the most benefit to another group of people who are the owners of the company. Workers have to do what maximises profits, and they have little to no say over this process. So I think that insight of seeing workplaces as political is really powerful. It helps us think about, well, should we be challenging this characterization of the modern workplace? Does it have to be this way? Are there possible alternatives? And Isabelle's proposal of like bicameralism is a real sort of leading example that there are these alternatives. We can think about work as possibly being structured in a way that isn't such that one group is dominating another, but power is shared and there's more accountability, and workers get a real say over their working lives. So you can probably tell from my tone and what I've said already, I'm a real ally of Isabelle's. I'm not going to stand up here and sort of give an opposing view or anything like that. And what I will say, I guess, should be interpreted in the spirit of just some friendly comments in the spirit of constructive dialogue, maybe. So I'm just going to mention two things. One's about a sort of extra reason maybe we should care about workplace democracy. And then the second thing is about the importance of also thinking about some other changes in the economy more widely, in addition to workplace governance and ownership, if we want to get the full potential benefits of workplace democracy. So the first thing is an addition, like I said, is an additional reason to care about workplace democracy. So I think the most impactful and influential argument of Isabelle's arguments for workplace democracy is that it's kind of it's a matter of justice or fairness, right? It's about what people are owed in some way. Given workers are investing their labor into the company, and given sort of the social position they hold in the workplace, it's a matter of right. They should have some say over their working lives. So I think that's a very powerful argument. I don't disagree with that at all. But as Isabelle also does in her work, it's also important to think about how workplace democracy can be good for people. This helps sort of the political feasibility and potential general uptake of the vision after all. If you can say, well, here are all these ways it's actually good for you to be in a democratic firm. So tonight, what I want to say tonight, I'm not just meaning good for people in the sense workplace democracy kind of enhances material interests. So you could point to things like having a higher salary or better working conditions. But there's also ways in which workplace democracy can be good for people in sort of a deeper philosophical sense, in terms of like living a good life or having a flourishing life. So one component of a flourishing life is that the activities that make it up are meaningful. So meaningfulness is something that philosophers like to argue a lot about, but one thing that's often focused on is for something to be meaningful, it needs to connect up to some kind of sort of larger purpose or make some positive difference in the world. Now you might be sitting there thinking, okay, how does this link up to workplace democracy? Well, what I believe is that when workplaces are more democratic, they can really enhance the ability of people's work to be meaningful by helping alleviate a lot of the kind of discontent and alienation that exists in the modern workplace. So if you sort of listen to what workers say and you look at surveys and these kinds of things, all the data, what comes up again and again and again and again is that lots of workers are very dissatisfied in modern work. And a cause of a lot of that dissatisfaction is sort of doubt in workers that their job is kind of positively contributing to the world. You might have heard of the phenomenon of like bullshit jobs. And I think the kind of uptake of that idea had showed that it really struck a chord with a lot of people. So people might think like their job isn't contributing anything at all, while others might have real qualms that in their work they're kind of harming others or society in some way. So what workplace democracy can do is by it's about the sort of content of the decisions in which it would involve workers. Workers would be involved in the strategic decisions of the company. So they would have a say in things like what products or services they're selling, the markets in which they operate, the goals of the company. And all of these things, I think, would really put workers much more in contact with the kind of social impact that their company is or is not having. So you might think, okay, but in some cases, surely sort of democratizing work is only to confirm someone's suspicions that yes, sort of in this company we're harming the world or something like that. But that's the beauty of workplace democracy, is it would give workers a chance to actually change that, do something about it, change what their company is doing. And so by giving workers this sort of sense of responsibility and co-authorship, sort of being as part of this shared activity, they can identify more with the ends their company's having, and therefore really believe that they're making more of a difference in the world. So I think it can really help people have more meaningful work and therefore a higher quality of life. So then just the second thing I want to raise briefly is this idea that in order to get a lot of, or all of the benefits of workplace democracy, we need to also think about some other changes that might need to happen in the economy more widely. So workplaces obviously aren't in bubbles, they exist in a wider economy, and the details of that economy can sometimes act as very strong constraints on what that company is able to do or not to. So even if we had as kind of the Isabelle's sort of ideal vision of like fully worker-owned companies, if these companies are still operating in like heavily financialized capitalist economies, this is really going to still constrain what these companies can or cannot do. And there's real examples of this. So you might have heard of the Mondragon Corporation in Spain. So this is like a group of fully worker-owned and run co-ops that sort of cooperate together, and they've successfully carved out a competitive niche and a viable business model in Spain. So in many ways, Mondragon, I think, is great, and there's lots of great benefits to the system. But one criticism that has been sometimes raised is that in order to keep competitive in a modern economy, some of these Mondragon corporations have sort of had to act more and more like the capitalist corporations they're supposed to be an alternative to. So just one example of that, some of these worker-owned companies have either bought or created subsidiary companies in the global south. So they can take advantage of things like cheaper labor or, much less restrictive regulation and stuff like this. And they own these companies. But the companies haven't been set up to be democratic in any way at all, either internally to the company in the global south or with its relation to its parent company in Spain. So the real worry here is not to sort of criticize, the greediness of the workers in the worker-run corporation, but the real worry is that in order to stay competitive, these worker-run firms are effectively having to become like a capitalist boss over the workers in the subsidiary company. So I think just the upshot here is that we shouldn't have too much tunnel vision, and Isabelle, I think, would fully agree with this, and that we really need to think also about some other dynamics in the economy as well. So how do we structure markets, or how do we think about processes of investment or the distribution of asset ownership in the economy if we really want to get all the benefits of workplace democracy. And think about how we could align those sorts of things and the economy more generally to democratic principles. So if we care about bringing our shared economic life in line with democratic principles, workplace democracy is going to be a really crucial and important part of that story, but it's important to keep in mind that it might not perhaps be the entire story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caleb. I'd like to welcome Isabelle back on stage so you can answer all the questions the audience. Who wants to go first? Anyone have a question? Yeah.
Thanks. If you're holding it, I wanted to ask. So I'm convinced, right, that we need to transform beyond the shareholder-centered corporation. But the link between an employee-controlled corporation and them being sort of better for the environment or planetary boundaries always feels a little optimistic to me. Like, what if Shell was controlled by its employees, Can we really assume, based on the cooperative and social economy companies we know that they would sort of quickly stop drilling for oil? Or would they just effectively be new oil shareholders, given that they're a small group in a big world? So that's my question.
Thank you very much. This is obviously a very good question. And I guess it's really a huge question. But I would say probably two things. And three things. My first point is that it's not out of sort of a blind faith or naivete that I am making this connection, that I'm not the only one to make, between the need to democratize firms and empower workers and decarbonization as an acronym for basically fitting the economy and fitting the firm within the 9 planetary boundaries. And we know that today we are out of 7 of these planetary boundaries threshold, safety threshold. So the situation is absolutely serious. So it's first or second, it's a systemic problem. So it's at the systemic level that we should think about this problem. And basically, to make it very short, my understanding is that we have to find a force that is as powerful, as strong as the capitalist force, to bring it on par, if you want, to oppose itself potentially to the force of capital. So it's a structural problem that we face. And if you're looking around, there are not many forces apart from actually those who are within those firms already. And so this is the first part of the answer. It's about getting out of the extractive nature of the regime of accumulation on the capitalist side that we need to confront. And for that, my understanding is that indeed some significant worker power would make a big difference. Would it be enough? Certainly not. And so that's the second part, or the third part of my answer. It is also absolutely clear in my understanding that we are not going to solve the problem of the planet going, I would say, individually, one firm after the other, and changing the structure of one firm after the other. What has to happen is that the relationship between firms in general and the state and public powers change. That is, that the economic actors eventually at some point understand that they have to work in a cooperative way with public powers, because all our main problems are of global magnitude. So we need to empower our public powers, not private powers. But to do that, we need, this is what I alluded to, we need to re-embed firms within the democratic architecture. And from that perspective also, to democratize them internally seems to me the best proxy we have toward a situation where literally individually in each firms we would face decisions that would be much more amicable, I would say, to public powers. Because imagine today what they are doing is actively finding ways to escape regulations, finding ways to crush regulations. So private firms are the enemies of public powers. The day they are internally democratized, my understanding is that at least the workers would see the point of having a state that can guarantee healthcare, education, some decent mobility. And so the lobbying that currently firms are going into would not be supported by the leadership of these internally democratized firms, if you want. So these are the two things that I'm looking at beyond the fact that, and we also know that workers really have an entirely different attitude to environmental problems that capital investors. And the latest survey we have, and I finish with that, it's that 83% of workers, it's a survey from Kite Insight, a UK-based bureau, who surveyed in 10 countries more than 8,000 employees across all firms. 83% of employees say that they would like to take steps toward protecting the environment within the realm of their job, that they see things that are relevant to the environment, but they don't do it because it's not formally into their job description, and they don't feel empowered to do it because they know that this is not where they should go. 83%. So that speaks. So let's not be naive, and obviously, and let me make just one last connection because this is important because I did not put the last slide. It's the connection with our network, democratizingwork.org. If you have an interest into all our discussion, please go on our website and subscribe. We send a newsletter. And the connection with the decommodification of labor is absolutely also fundamental, because there the most interesting proposition, I believe, is the job guarantee. The idea of the job guarantee a job to anyone who would lose his position in the ecological transition also is a crucial step to take if we don't want to have these scenarios where workers just hang on to the job of the firm, because of course they're going to lose their position, they're going to lose the relevance of their skills. And if you don't guarantee a decent transition at the individual level, obviously it's not going to be nice. So that has to be part of also the package, but it's doable.
I'm going to go to the next question. You have a question?
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I hear you speaking about making a transition, if I understand it correctly, from a kind of advisory position from workers' councils to a more validating position. But that gives them the power to either validate or block policy, but shouldn't they also have the means to initiate policy? Yeah. Because that would maybe be an answer to the former question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I fully agree. Obviously, my understanding of democracy, and it's also related to what Caleb said about the meaningful work, is that if we are citizens, it's about participation, right? And it's about this active participation in the problem-solving reality that the society is, so that the firm is in particular. And so this active role is certainly what would basically be it's the best case scenario. We want to see every worker become empowered so that they can participate to actively solve all the problems that they see, they recognize, and absolutely. So it's not a passive role that is that we are speaking about, and I probably did not make that clear enough. Thank you so much.
You have a question, right?
Thank you so much for your presentations. I think it's related to what we're talking about now, and thinking here particularly from like a global south perspective. There's post-work scholars who've said that well, what's worse than being exploited under capitalism as a laborer is not being exploited at all. So I'm wondering, this refers to unemployed people or marginalized people, the reserve army of labor. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, how can democratizing workspaces be also a vehicle to breed kind of solidarities between workers and those who are outside of the regime of waged labor?
Thank you so much. Absolutely. I guess that's the broader aspiration. It's this solidarity through humanity. And here, maybe I want to come back to the proposition of the job guarantee, because it speaks directly to the problem of basically setting a floor to the labor market. Just the fact that we are speaking about a labor market is a really terrible thing, because what you exchange on the market maybe is, you know, some products, some wheat, but not human beings, right? We used to exchange slaves on the market. And so the idea of the job guarantee is really to make sure that anyone who wants a decent job that contributes to caring for society, caring for the planet, has access to that job, so that we are not putting people in a position where they have to choose between being a cashier in a supermarket where goods are produced in China and just, you know, fully plastic based, part-time, not able to be there for their kids and not earning enough, but have access to a decent job position. If that would be guaranteed, then obviously we would see a raise of the whole labor market in terms of labor conditions. And this is not a dream. It has been actually in France, we've been looking at the experimentation territoire zéro chômeur de longue durée, so long-term unemployed territory, which are micro-territory within which a firm is set up, which goals is to employ people. Those long-term unemployed people, and they actively, so there is this active dimension, they actively participate in identifying the needs that the market is not addressing, and they build up job positions that they fill, and that guarantees them a decent wage with union protections and all that. And what we see, because this has been put in place for now 8 years, the experimentation runs now into 80 micro-territory. Half of the people who enter into this program find a job back into the normal labor market. So it's certainly not like, you know, we have this critique from the economists that say, oh, these type of programs are basically getting people into poverty traps and they remain in those type of positions. First, it's not a poverty trap, but then it actually put people back onto their feet so that they can become a member of, take part into the normal economy, let's say. But so that, I think, is very important in terms of addressing all the informalities and the invisible work and the gig work that we are seeing developed in our society, so in the north. But then the south dimension, also the global south, I think is absolutely critical in the perspective of identifying why and how firms are political entities. Because what we know, and let me take an example, when we look at the 500,000 workers in China who work producing the Apple products, well, because it's possible technically, legally, to say, for Apple to say, these are not my workers, these are the workers of Foxconn, an entirely different entity. We have nothing to do with Foxconn. What we do is we just buy their products. But this is completely fake news. You know, this is fake news. These workers, they are labor investing into Apple, and 500,000 of these workers in China are actually, like, of course, workers of Apple. And we should be able to identify all those who labor invest across the globe in what we have called the supply chain as a word to actually distract from the responsibility of these major firms to pay decent salaries, to care for their responsibility across the globe and literally exploit workers in the global south. And now the problem of sourcing all the rare earth material, for instance, for the electric transition is also a huge problem of irresponsibility of our global north corporations who are pretending that these mines, these fields which are sourcing the rare earth material that we need for producing our batteries and that we are using, we have no responsibility into that. They're just producers of goods that we are buying. I think we have to envision new categories into the law that will make these visions completely obsolete because there is no corporate social responsibility in the context that we know today.
I'm going to go to the next question. You.
Oh, thank you very much for your talk. I wanted to ask a classic question of the problems of economic democracy, and I just wanted to hear your take on that. If these organizations are so great, cooperatives and these ops, why don't we have more in society, and why do they represent such a small percentage of the workforce?
A whole chapter also to write, or a book to write on this, of course.
Try to keep it a little bit short, because there's some other questions. So
I know, but I don't know.
You want to invest a lot in your answers, but
this is such an important question. I would say a cultural problem and a financial problem, and then there are many other dimensions. Okay, but let me focus on those two ones that are well researched in the literature. Cultural problem, when we look at who is starting new economic endeavors, who's starting new business projects. It is a category of people who are rarely informed about the possibility to develop that project within a cooperative framework. And this is why precisely Mondragon has developed actually a university and a startup hub to really host and nurture the entrepreneurial spirit with a cooperative mindset, so that at the birth of any business project, you would find an entrepreneur who knows about the cooperative structure as a possibility to set up his business. Okay, so, and obviously in our business schools, unfortunately, we would know about that. We would be in a different world if what we would teach was the history of cooperatives and how to build a cooperative and the problems of cooperative firms, obviously, because there are problems, but to equip students into that mindset. It's absolutely not the direction that education has been taking. So that's a cultural dimension of the problem. And I mentioned financial. What we see is that whenever cooperative firms are developed and want to grow, they quickly hit a ceiling in terms of development, because they don't have access to the same funding possibilities than standard businesses, because who is behind those the capital that could possibly be invested? Well, people who don't have a cooperative mindset. And so what you find is a lot of once successful cooperative which grow and then which do not find the necessary funding to get to the next stage. And so then, of course, there is a decay. And so indeed here also the history of Mondragon is super interesting, because you know that Mondragon has problems, obviously, but the fantastic thing is that they want to address these problems. They say themselves, we have a problem. We have those workers in China who are not cooperative members. We should do something about it. And they are actively thinking about what they should do. And I'm quite confident that they're going to do things about that. Like, it's not settled. It's not something that they are happy with, right? And so this is exactly, I don't think anyone in the room think this is all easy and can be solved overnight. But what we would love to see is firms getting into the position of thinking, oh my God, we have these workers in China, we've built this subsidiary, actually it's not right. We should make them members of the cooperatives. But how are we going to do that? And so to come back to the problem of finance, Mondragon has set up, and this is how historians analyze the early success of Mondragon as a group, is that they actually saved money very actively and used the saved money to fund the next endeavor. And so that has been critical, because they were independently funded, if you want.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next question.
Okay, thank you for your talk. What I don't completely understand yet is how you think this transition can happen. Yeah, of course, that's a difficult question, but for companies that now are in the situation that they have where the shareholders are in power, how are the rules, when the rules are written by the ones who don't, who are not gonna get any advantage from a change in the rules, how are the rules gonna be changed? Or should this be enforced by the government, and how hopeful are you that this might happen anytime?
So three questions.
Anytime soon. Yeah. Thank you very much for your question. I totally share your questions. So how can this happen? I think, well, just two elements to this immense question again. The first one, if you look at the history of despotism and democratic revolution, you have to be hopeful, because it takes time, but at some point there is a revolution. So something happened. I don't know when, but it's clear that despotism is not lifelong, and it's not sustainable, and it's not smart. So it's not an intelligent system. So the epistemic problem also of taking the right decision, facing the situations in which we are, is gonna hit back at some point into the system. But that can take way too longer than what we have if we listen to our colleagues in the climate science. So we know we are in the critical decade. So the second element is that I believe that every individual firm that would enter such a transition, explicitly saying we want to go into this direction, we want to extend voice to workers in a much more significant way. We want to take steps so that the ownership of the firm could be slowly but surely transferred to workers, to steward owners, to get out of the financial system, to disconnect with the financial actors. That would be extremely helpful steps, I think, at just that individual level. But also at the structural public level, obviously we need clear signs that at some point society would take things into the different direction. And I can share one hopeful note again, which is what is taking place in Spain, that Erwin mentioned, that the Spanish government has decided that they wanted to get scientific input to think about this transition, to get workers a path toward voice and ownership at the level of every firm. That's Spain, but Spain is currently the fastest growing economy in Europe, so it's an interesting situation that they are in, and we are going to hand out our report in January, and hopefully this can be also a step where other countries see that there is leadership in that country that looks into this direction. We've never had a government that really was looking into this problem seriously, faced with 50 years of neoliberalism, right? So this is a very new step. I don't know where it will go, but I can only see that this is news. This is going to be something interesting to see where they're going to lead this and what in other countries can be inspiring. I know that the situation at the EU level and in many EU countries is not good, but there are election cycles and there are also a speed in the changes that are coming that could also be at some point become advantageous to these discussions.
Okay, go ahead.
Muchísimas gracias por una charla tan divertido como interesante. You've been talking about ways forward and ways out, but don't we have a perfect example in Spain itself, apart from Mondragon, in the community of Marinaleda in Andalusia, which has been a textbook example of economic democracy for some decades already. Do you think it's possible to expand that model on a larger scale?
And maybe you should also explain what that model is for those of us who don't know it.
So a model of a tight network of cooperative firms, but as you mentioned, indeed, culturally very tightly connected and connected to the culture of this region. Well, obviously, it doesn't seem plausible to think that Andalusia could be transplanted in a place other than Andalusia, but I believe indeed that with proper state leadership, if the state would actually reorient all the tools it has, but not only the legislation, but all the incentives that the state can use as the tax code to actually support value firms which are much more advanced in this transition, like cooperatives, we would actually see results, and probably fast, because at least we have to believe economists about that. Economic actors are responsive to incentive mechanisms. So if the incentive mechanism could be shaped, designed to go into the right direction, if there would be, of course, you depend from the will of some state actors here, but then we should see some results. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Spain from that perspective.
So we have room for 2 more questions. So go ahead.
También le agradezco mucho. Could you say that the democratization of workspaces slowed down global action, climate action, with 2 arguments that you said before, that workers with responsibility take a broad approach to broader goals, so they're decentralized and could become bureaucratic. And second argument being that it could release pressure on political action by taking action on workplaces that don't have such a global impact.
So so it's very nice to hear so much Spanish in the room, but muchas gracias. But if I understand your question correctly, that basically an active workplace democracy type of environment would slow down action at the environmental and global level. I don't agree with that. I think precisely that, and this is related to the argument that I mentioned earlier about the need to think about a way to embed these private actors into the democratic architecture. And so my understanding is that as you democratize internally firms, they will see states as a much more cooperative actor that they need, that can help them achieve their own goals by fostering the type of economic environment that they need. And so all the contrary, I think standards like environmental standards that are so weak today should actually become much more stronger, because firms would see the point, because they were populated, the decision makers, if you want, inside firms would be those who are impacted, those who would value these decisions about pollution, respect for the planet, and all those all the problems related to the 9 planetary boundaries. But I see you're not happy. We can discuss later, okay? Yeah. I'm sure I'm not convincing enough.
I'm going to go to the last question. Do you speak Spanish as well? Or not? That's okay.
Thank you very much for your speech. My question is that all the countries are also involved in the Sustainable Development Goals, and one of them is economic development and decent work. Do you see any role for the United Nations, and in particular the International Labour Organization, where states, employers and employees, trade unions are joining for decent work discussions?
Thank you so much for that question. Absolutely. I want to convene the fact that the ILO, the International Labour Organization, was actually the first institution of the United Nations system ever built at the end of World War I, based on the understanding that at the time the West had that if we want to nurture peace, we have to ensure social justice. That you cannot have peace without social justice. And this cannot be more true than today. And at the end of the Second World War, it had to be repeated because, again, we had forgotten. This is the whole analysis of Carpolani, whom I mentioned earlier. At the end of World War II, the Declaration of Philadelphia, 1946, the preamble says, labor is not a commodity, that there is no lasting peace without social justice. So here we are again today, and it's the tragedy of humanity, really, that we've been through such horror. We thought about it. We thought we understood the kernel of what had to be understood, which is indeed that we have to treat each other as equals in dignity and rights, the first article of the Universal Human Rights Declaration. But still, we fall. Still, we don't practice what we know is the only way to move forward. And so absolutely the ILO is a fundamental institution that is now actively debased by the United States and other countries, because obviously it is the one of the representative of this hope that we can build a global economy that's built on respect, and that's the only way to nurture peace. So
I'm afraid we have to leave it at that. Please give it up for Isabelle Ferreras and for Caleb Althorpe.
Thank you.
So, before you go, I have two short messages. So we are continuing this series next year. We'll be talking about fascism with Federico Finkelstein from New York and social democracy with Stuart White from the UK. So if you want to know more about it, please subscribe to our newsletter through this QR code. So that's the first QR code. Then another, we'd really like to know what you think of this event. So please take out your phone and point your camera at the QR code. It's just a very short survey. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next year. Bye-bye.